Tom, my son, forced me to sell my house for his wedding, but he didn't know I had the deed to his dream home. Part 1. The decision. I never thought I'd be sitting across from a real estate agent, signing away the home where I'd raised my family, where I'd lived with my late wife for over 30 years. But there I was, my arthritic fingers cramping around the pen as I initialed page after page, the weight of betrayal sitting heavy in my chest. "Just a few more signatures, Mr. Caldwell," said Brenda, the overly cheerful agent with her perfect blonde bob and bright red blazer. She slid another document toward me. "This one confirms you understand the closing costs." I nodded mechanically and signed where indicated. Thomas, my son, sat beside me, occasionally checking his watch, an expensive Swiss timepiece I couldn't begin to afford on my retired teacher's pension. His presence should have been comforting, but instead it felt like supervision, making sure the old man didn't back out at the last minute. "We're almost done, Dad," Thomas said, patting my shoulder with what he probably thought was reassurance. "The McMasters are really excited about the house. They have 2 kids, you know, a boy and a girl, just like our family used to be." I looked up at him, studying the face of the boy I'd raised. Now a 32-year-old investment banker with perfectly coiffed dark hair, a tailored suit, and ambition that seemed to have crowded out everything else I'd tried to instill in him. Where was the child who used to bring home injured birds to nurse back to health? The teenager who volunteered at the homeless shelter every Thanksgiving? Somewhere along the way, success had changed him, hardened him. "That's nice," I managed, though the thought of strangers living in our family home made my stomach twist. Children who would never know that the small notches on the kitchen doorframe marked Thomas's and his sister Rebecca's growth over the years. New owners who wouldn't realize that the slightly uneven patch in the living room ceiling was from the time Thomas had crashed through it while playing superhero in the attic. "And Dad, once this is done, we can focus completely on the wedding preparations," Thomas continued, his voice brightening. "Caroline's parents already put down the deposit for the Westbrook Country Club. It's going to be amazing." Ah, yes, the wedding. The $75,000 extravaganza that had become the catalyst for selling my home. Thomas and his fiancée Caroline had their hearts set on a celebration that rivaled royal weddings. And somehow, the responsibility for funding a significant portion had fallen on my shoulders. "The country club is beautiful in June," I said, because that's what a supportive father would say. I didn't mention that Rose and I had gotten married in my parents' backyard with fewer than 50 guests. And those had been the happiest days of my life. "One last signature," Brenda said, pointing to the final line. "And then the house is officially sold." I hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. In that moment, memories flooded through me. Rose planting her beloved rose garden in the backyard. Baby Rebecca taking her first steps across the living room carpet. Thomas throwing a baseball through the kitchen window and looking so terrified. I couldn't even be angry. 35 years of life, love, and loss contained within those walls. "Dad?" Thomas's voice had an edge to it now. "Is something wrong?" I met his eyes, wondering if he had any idea what he was asking me to give up. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was the last physical space I shared with Rose before cancer took her 5 years ago. It was where I could still feel her presence in the early morning light that streamed through the kitchen windows, where I could almost hear her humming as I tended to her roses. But Thomas saw none of that. He saw an asset, a solution to his financial needs, a burden for me to maintain alone at 72. "Nothing's wrong," I said quietly, and signed my name. Brenda beamed, gathering the papers with practiced efficiency. "Congratulations, Mr. Caldwell. We'll wire the funds to your account within 3 business days. The McMasters will take possession at the end of the month." Thomas clapped me on the back. "Well done, Dad. This is the right decision. That house was way too big for you anyway, and the maintenance was becoming a nightmare. The retirement community is going to be perfect. No lawn to mow, no stairs to climb. You'll thank me for this." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The retirement community, Peaceful Pines, was Thomas's idea of where I should spend my remaining years. A one-bedroom apartment in a complex filled with other elderly people waiting out their days with scheduled activities and cafeteria meals. I'd visited once and felt my soul shrink at the thought of living there. But Thomas didn't know about my alternate plan. He didn't know about the modest but charming two-bedroom house I'd already purchased in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. And most importantly, he didn't know about the property I'd acquired 15 years ago, a piece of land overlooking the lake, with his name on the deed. "Let me take you to lunch, Dad," Thomas offered, already standing and gathering his briefcase. "We should celebrate." "Actually, I think I'll head home. I have a lot of packing to do." I rose slowly, my knees protesting after sitting too long. Thomas checked his watch again. "Sure, that makes sense. I should get back to the office anyway. Caroline and I are meeting with the wedding planner tonight, but I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Maybe I can come by this weekend to help you sort through things." "That would be nice," I said, though we both knew he wouldn't. There would be some work emergency, some client who needed immediate attention. There always was. Outside, Thomas gave me a quick perfunctory hug before striding to his BMW. I watched him drive away, then slowly made my way to my 10-year-old Buick. As I settled behind the wheel, I finally allowed myself a moment of grief, hands gripping the steering wheel as tears blurred my vision. Rose would have been heartbroken to see what had become of our son, of our family. Rebecca, at least, had maintained her compassion and sense of proportion, though living in Seattle with her wife and their adopted daughter meant I saw her far less than I would like. I wiped my eyes, started the car, and headed home. For now, at least it was still home, with determination solidifying within me. Thomas had forced my hand, but he had no idea what cards I was still holding. The following week passed in a blur of packing boxes and sorting through decades of accumulated life. Every item came with a decision and often a memory. Rose's clothes, which I still couldn't bring myself to donate 5 years after her death. Photo albums documenting family vacations, school performances, holiday gatherings. Thomas's collection of baseball trophies that he hadn't wanted when he moved out, but I couldn't bear to throw away. Rebecca called daily, her concern evident even from across the country. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" she asked during our Friday call. "You know you could come live with us. Emily would love having her grandpa around, and we have the guest room." "I know, sweetheart, and I appreciate the offer," I said, cradling the phone as I taped up another box of books. "But Seattle's not my home, and you have your own lives. I'll be fine." "It's just so sudden," she persisted. "When Thomas told me you were selling the house for his wedding, I couldn't believe it. That doesn't sound like you at all." I paused, considering how much to reveal. Rebecca had always been perceptive, sensitive to the undercurrents of family dynamics in a way Thomas never was. "Well, sometimes circumstances force difficult choices," I said carefully. "Thomas and Caroline have their hearts set on this wedding." "A wedding that costs more than most people's annual salary," Rebecca said with undisguised disapproval. "Dad, you worked your whole life as a high school history teacher. You shouldn't have to sell your home to fund Thomas's extravaganza. Caroline's parents are loaded. Let them pay for it." "It's complicated, Becca." "It's not complicated. It's wrong. Thomas is taking advantage of you. Ever since Mom died—" "Rebecca," I cut her off gently, "I appreciate your concern, but I need you to trust me. I know what I'm doing." There was a long silence on the other end. "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Thomas is steamrolling you, and you're letting him because you're afraid of losing him too." Her words hit uncomfortably close to the mark. Since Rose died, Thomas had become increasingly distant, his visits home less frequent, his calls shorter and more perfunctory. I'd found myself accepting his behavior, making excuses, desperate to maintain whatever connection remained with my only son. Just promise me you're not sacrificing your security for Thomas's wedding, Rebecca said. Promise me you'll be okay. I promise, I said, and meant it, though not perhaps in the way she imagined. Your old dad still has a few tricks up his sleeve. After we hung up, I sat heavily on a packing box, surveying what remained of my living room. Most of the furniture would go to the new house, which I'd furnished minimally so far. Thomas believed everything was being placed in storage, until I settled in at Peaceful Pines, another deception that weighed on me. I'd never been a dishonest man. Rose and I had raised our children with strong values: integrity, compassion, responsibility. We'd lived modestly on my teacher's salary and her part-time work as a librarian, prioritizing experiences over possessions, connection over status. Where had we gone wrong with Thomas? When had money and prestige become his guiding principles? Was it during college, when he'd fallen in with a wealthier crowd? Or during his early banking career, mentored by men who measured success in bonuses and acquisitions? The doorbell rang, interrupting my ruminations. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Thomas never dropped by without calling first. Curious, I made my way to the front door. Standing on my porch was Caroline, Thomas's fiancée, elegant as always in a cream-colored pantsuit, her ash-blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. In the year since their engagement, I could count on one hand the number of times she'd visited the house. "Richard," she greeted me with a practiced smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Caroline, this is a surprise. Please come in." I stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about the boxes in disarray. "I apologize for the mess. As you can see, packing is well underway." "That's actually why I'm here," she said, following me into what remained of the living room. "Thomas mentioned you were sorting through everything yourself, and I thought I might offer some assistance." I gestured for her to sit on the couch, one of the few pieces of furniture not yet wrapped for moving. "That's very thoughtful. Would you like some tea? I think the kettle is still unpacked." "No, thank you." She perched on the edge of the couch, looking distinctly uncomfortable among the half-packed boxes. "Richard, I want to be direct. Thomas told me you're selling this house to help pay for our wedding." I nodded cautiously, unsure where this was heading. "I want you to know that wasn't my idea," she continued. "My parents are covering most of the expenses, and while the venue is admittedly costly, we could have made adjustments." This was unexpected. In our limited interactions, Caroline had always struck me as perfectly aligned with Thomas's priorities: career advancement, social, status, material success. Her family moved in elite circles. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Northeast. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "The thing is," she continued, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her pants, "I get the impression you and I don't know each other very well, and perhaps you've formed certain opinions about me based on the wedding plans and other factors." "Other factors?" "My family's financial situation, the circles we move in." She met my eyes directly. "I know Thomas can be focused when he wants something, determined, and I'm concerned he may have pressured you into this decision." I studied my future daughter-in-law with new interest. "Why are you here, Caroline?" "Really?" She hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Because I love your son, but I'm not blind to his faults. And because if we're going to be family, I want there to be honesty between us." She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. "This is a check from my parents and me. It's enough to cover what Thomas expected from the sale of your house for the wedding. We want you to keep your home." I stared at the envelope she held out, momentarily speechless. This was the last thing I had expected. "That's extremely generous," I finally managed. "But I can't accept that." "Please, Richard. My father set aside money for my wedding when I was born. There's more than enough. This house clearly means a great deal to you, and selling it for one day Even an important day seems wrong. I shook my head, not taking the envelope. The house is already sold. The papers are signed. Caroline's perfectly composed expression faltered. Oh, I didn't realize it had progressed so far. Thomas made it sound like it was still in process. The new owners take possession in 2 weeks. She placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. Then use this to buy another house. One you actually want, not some depressing retirement complex. Please. Her sincerity was palpable, and I found myself revising my impression of the woman my son had chosen. There was more depth there than I had given her credit for. Caroline, I appreciate this gesture more than I can express. It speaks volumes about your character, but I need to handle this situation in my own way. I smiled at her. And between us, I'm not actually planning to move into Peaceful Pines. Her eyebrows rose. You're not? No. I've purchased another house. Thomas doesn't know yet. She looked momentarily surprised, then gave a small laugh. Good for you. Though he won't be pleased when he finds out. No, I don't imagine he will. Caroline studied me with newfound respect. You have a plan, don't you? Beyond just the new house. I've been a teacher for 40 years, Caroline. I've learned a thing or two about delivering difficult lessons. I picked up the envelope and handed it back to her. Keep this. Consider it my wedding gift to you, knowing that my future daughter-in-law is a woman of compassion and principle. She accepted the envelope with a thoughtful expression. Thomas talks about how you used to be, before he got caught up in his career. The camping trips, the volunteer work you did together, the way you made history come alive for him. He remembers, even if he doesn't show it. Her words touched something tender within me. I hope so. Whatever you're planning, she said, rising, to leave, I think I'm on your side. And I think his mother would be too. After Caroline left, I sat for a long time among the boxes containing my life, turning over our conversation. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for myself, but for Thomas, too. If he had chosen a partner with such insight and moral clarity, perhaps the son I'd raised wasn't entirely lost after all. With renewed purpose, I reached for the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. It was time to put the final pieces of my plan in motion. Part 2. The Revelation. The day before I was set to leave my home for the last time, Thomas finally made an appearance. He arrived in the late afternoon, looking harried and distracted, his tie loosened and a faint shadow of stubble on his usually clean-shaven face. Sorry I couldn't get here sooner, Dad, he said, giving me a quick one-armed hug before surveying the stacks of boxes in the foyer. Work has been insane. We're closing a major acquisition deal, and the hours are brutal. I understand, I said, though in truth I didn't. I had never understood prioritizing work over family, not to the extent Thomas did. Most of the packing is done anyway. Great. He wandered into the living room, hands in his pockets, looking oddly out of place in the home where he'd grown up. Movers coming tomorrow? Yes, first thing in the morning. And you're all set with Peaceful Pines? They're expecting you? I hesitated, then decided this wasn't the moment for revelations. Everything's arranged. Thomas nodded, relief evident in his expression. Good. That's good. I think you'll be happy there, Dad. No maintenance, activities, people your own age, and it's only 15 minutes from my place, so Caroline and I can visit often. The irony of that statement, given his absence during the entire moving process, wasn't lost on me, but I let it pass without comment. Speaking of Caroline, I said casually, she stopped by last week. We had a nice chat. Something flickered across Thomas's face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. Did she? She didn't mention it? She offered to help with the packing. Very thoughtful of her. Yeah, well, she's great like that. Thomas replied, though his tone had a forced quality to it. Listen, Dad, I know this move is difficult, but it really is for the best. The money from the house will secure your future and help give Caroline and me the wedding we've been planning. It's a win-win. I studied my son, this stranger in expensive clothes who shared my features, but seemed to have forgotten every value I'd tried to instill in him. Is it a win-win? He frowned slightly. What do you mean? Just that winning usually feels better than this, I said quietly. Thomas's expression hardened. Dad, we've been over this. The house was too big for you. The maintenance was becoming impossible, and the money tied up in it was just sitting there when it could be put to use. It makes practical sense. Practical sense, I repeated. You know, your mother and I didn't choose this house because it was practical. We chose it because we could imagine raising a family here, because the backyard had room for a swing set, and the neighborhood had good schools, because it felt like a place where we could build a life together. And you did that, Thomas said, an edge of impatience creeping into his voice. You had 35 good years here, but Mom's gone, and times change. You have to be realistic. The casual dismissal of his mother's memory and our life together stung more than I could express. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that confrontation wasn't part of today's plan. You're right, I said, forcing myself to sound conciliatory. Times change. Speaking of which, how are the wedding plans coming along? The sudden shift in topic seemed to relieve him. Really well. The caterer is confirmed, the band is booked, and Caroline found a florist who can recreate exactly what she envisioned. It's going to be spectacular, Dad. 300 guests, a 7-piece orchestra for the ceremony, followed by a top DJ for the reception. 300 guests? Do you even know 300 people, Thomas? He laughed. Between our friends, colleagues, Caroline's family connections, and important clients, absolutely. It's as much a networking opportunity as a celebration. That's how things work in our world. Our world. As if we now existed in separate universes, his gleaming with wealth and status, mine small and outdated. I see, was all I said. And the honeymoon? 2 weeks in the Maldives, private villa over the water. Then a few days in Dubai on the way back. He grinned. I've already warned my boss I'll be completely off the grid for at least the Maldives portion. The cost of this wedding and honeymoon could have paid for several years of college education or a substantial down payment on a house. But pointing that out would only create tension, and there would be enough of that in the days to come. Well, it sounds like you have everything planned perfectly, I said. I'm sure it will be a day to remember. That's the goal. Thomas glanced at his watch. Listen, Dad, I hate to cut this short, but I should get back. We have an international call at 7, and I need to prepare. Of course, I said, unsurprised. Before you go, though, could you help me bring something down from the attic? There's a box I can't manage on my own with my knee acting up. Sure, he said, though his expression suggested this wasn't how he'd planned to spend his brief visit. What is it? Just some old family mementos I want to make sure don't get left behind. I led him upstairs and pulled down the attic ladder, which creaked with familiar protest. The musty smell of the rarely visited space greeted us as we climbed up. Thomas first, then me, moving carefully on my artificial knee. The attic was mostly empty now, the accumulated treasures and junk of decades having been sorted, donated, or packed. Only a few boxes remained, along with some old furniture covered in dust cloths. Which box? Thomas asked, already loosening his tie further in the warm, stuffy space. That one there. I pointed to a large cardboard box labeled Thomas. Important in my neat block lettering. Let's open it up here. Make sure everything's intact before we bring it down. Thomas dragged the box to the center of the attic floor and knelt beside it, lifting the lid with mild curiosity. Inside were carefully preserved items from his childhood, And youth. His first baseball glove, report cards, science fair ribbons, the wooden birdhouse we had built together when he was 7. "Wow," he said softly, lifting out a framed newspaper clipping of his high school baseball team winning the state championship. "I haven't seen this stuff in years." "Keep going," I encouraged, lowering myself to sit on an old trunk as my knee protested the climb. He dug deeper into the box, uncovering layer after layer of his life. Birthday cards he'd made for his mother and me, his college acceptance letter, photographs from family vacations. I watched his expression soften, the hard-edged businessman temporarily giving way to the boy I'd raised. "Remember that camping trip?" I asked, as he held up a photo of himself at 12, proudly displaying a fish he'd caught. "You were so determined to catch something bigger than Rebecca." "And I did," he said with a small smile, though she never forgave me for lording it over her. He set the photo aside gently, then reached into the box again and pulled out an envelope, thick, legal-sized, and sealed. "What's this?" Here it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. "Something I've been keeping for you," I said. "Open it." Thomas frowned slightly but broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. As he scanned the first page, his brow furrowed in confusion. "This is a property deed," he said slowly, "for land on Lake Windermere." He looked up at me. "I don't understand. Keep reading." He turned to the second page, then the third, his eyes widening as comprehension dawned. "This property is in my name," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since 2008? You've owned this land for 15 years? "You've owned it," I corrected him. "I purchased it in your name when you graduated college. 5 acres overlooking the lake, with building rights and private water access. I've been paying the property taxes all these years, waiting for the right time to tell you." Thomas stared at me, then back at the deed. "But this is prime real estate. Lake Windermere properties sell for millions now." "I know. I bought it before the area was developed, back when it was still mostly wilderness. Cost me most of my retirement savings at the time, but your mother and I agreed it was worth it." "Mom knew about this?" "It was her idea, actually. She always said you worked so hard, pushed yourself so much, that someday you'd need a place to truly rest. Somewhere beautiful and peaceful, away from the pressures you put on yourself." Thomas sat back on his heels, the document still in his hands, looking stunned. "I don't know what to say." "There's more," I said quietly. "The bottom set of papers." He shuffled through the stack and pulled out another document. Architectural drawings for a lakeside home. Modern but warm, with walls of glass facing the water, a wraparound deck, 4 bedrooms, and an open-concept living area centered around a massive stone fireplace. "What is this?" he asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. "The house you described to me 3 years ago," I said. "After you and Caroline started dating seriously. You said if you could build a dream home, this is what it would look like. I hired an architect to draw up the plans based on your description." Thomas stared at the renderings, then at me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "Why are you showing me this now?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the opening I needed. "Because you're about to get married, start a new chapter of your life, and because I wanted you to understand something important." I leaned forward, making sure I had his full attention. "Thomas, everything you've ever truly wanted, everything that would bring you real happiness, it was already within your reach. You didn't need to push so hard, sacrifice so much of yourself, compromise your values for success." "Dad!" "Let me finish. This land has been yours for 15 years. You could have built this house at any point if you'd known about it. You could have had your dream home without the 80-hour work weeks, without the constant stress, without selling your soul to that bank." "That's not fair," he protested. My career is important. The work I do matters. Does it? More than your relationships? More than your health? More than the values you once held? I gestured to the box of childhood mementos. The boy who volunteered at homeless shelters and rescued injured animals would hardly recognize the man who convinced his father to sell the family home to fund an extravagant wedding. Thomas flinched as if I'd struck him. I didn't force you to sell. Didn't you? Dad, Caroline, and I have our hearts set on the Westbrook. Dad, we've already put down non-refundable deposits. Dad, you don't need all this space anyway. Dad, be practical. I echoed his words from the past months. You knew I couldn't afford to contribute what you wanted without selling the house, and you pushed until I gave in. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. We could have found another venue, I guess, or scaled back some elements. But you didn't want to. Because in your world, the world you've chosen, appearances matter more than substance. What people think of your wedding matters more than what it means. Success is measured in square footage and luxury brands, not happiness or connection. That's not true, he said, but his protest lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you did something just because it brought you joy? When was the last time you spent an afternoon with no agenda, no networking opportunity, no strategic advantage to be gained? Thomas had no answer, and in his silence, I saw the first crack in the facade he'd built around himself. Your mother and I raised you to understand that a meaningful life isn't about what you accumulate or achieve. It's about who you become and how you treat others along the way. I gestured to the deed still in his hands. That land was meant to be a gift for the man we knew you would grow into, someone who understood that balance, who valued connection over status, who remembered where he came from. And you don't think I'm that man, Thomas said quietly, a statement rather than a question. I think that man is still inside you, buried beneath Brooks Brothers suits and performance bonuses. I think he's suffocating, Thomas. And I think deep down, you know it too. My son stared at the architectural drawings, running his finger along the lines of the home that could have been his. So that's why you're showing me this now? To teach me some kind of lesson? Partly, I admitted. But also because despite everything, you're still my son and I love you. The land is still yours. The dream of that house can still be realized, if that's what you truly want. But the wedding will happen regardless. Caroline's parents have more than enough resources, as I think you well know. And Caroline herself came to see me, offering to return the money from the house sale. Thomas's head snapped up. She what? She offered me a check to cover what you expected from the house sale, so I wouldn't have to move. She was quite concerned about me. She never told me that, he said, looking troubled. Perhaps she understood you wouldn't react well. I held his gaze steadily. She seems to see you quite clearly, Thomas, both your strengths and your blind spots. That's a rare gift in a partner. For several minutes, Thomas sat in silence, the papers in his lap, surrounded by the physical evidence of his childhood. A life before ambition had narrowed his vision, before success had redefined his values. I waited, giving him the space to process, to feel whatever was emerging beneath his carefully constructed exterior. I don't understand, he finally said. If Caroline offered to cover the money and you still had to sell the house anyway, where is that money going? Ah, I said with a small smile. That's the final part of the story. The proceeds from the house are going into a trust, partly for my actual retirement needs, but mostly to establish a scholarship fund in your mother's name at the high school where I taught. Every year it will help students who, like her, have the intellect and drive for college but lack the financial resources. Thomas stared at me, and I saw the moment understanding dawned. You were never going to use that money for my wedding. No, I confirmed. I wasn't. Just as I'm not moving into Peaceful Pines. I've purchased a small house near the lake. Not as grand as your potential home, but perfect for my needs. Room for a garden, space for when Rebecca and her family visit, and no stairs to challenge. My knee. You've had this planned all along, he said slowly, since I first brought up contributing to the wedding. Not exactly. I've had the land in your name for 15 years, and I've been contributing to Rose's scholarship fund since she died. But selling the house was always going to be difficult. Too many memories, too much of our life together embedded in those walls. I sighed. When you pressed me to sell for the wedding, I realized it might be an opportunity to help you see what you've become, what you're in danger of losing in your pursuit of external success. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the outline of the dream house on the architectural plans. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Do you know why I pushed so hard? After college? Tell me, I said gently. Because I saw how you and Mom struggled. How you'd check the bank balance before every significant purchase. How you kept the thermostat low in winter to save on heating. How you drove cars until they practically fell apart. He met my eyes directly. I never wanted to live like that. I never wanted to worry about money the way you two did. The revelation hit me with unexpected force. All these years, I'd assumed Thomas's drive for wealth came from external influences. His college friends, his mentors at the bank, the allure of status. I'd never considered that it might have roots in his childhood observations, in his perception of our modest lifestyle as deprivation rather than choice. We were happy, Thomas, I said softly. Your mother and I. We had what mattered. Meaningful. Work, a loving family, a home that was truly ours. We chose experiences over things, connection over consumption. I know that now, he admitted. But as a kid, as a teenager, I just saw the limitations. The vacations we couldn't take, the clothes I couldn't have, the experiences that were out of reach because of money. And so you built a life designed to eliminate those limitations, I said, understanding dawning. But at what cost, Thomas? What have you sacrificed for financial security? He looked down at the childhood mementos surrounding him. Too much, maybe. It wasn't a full acknowledgement, but it was a beginning. A crack in the armor he'd built around himself. A glimmer of the sun I remembered. It's not too late, I said. To find balance. To reclaim the parts of yourself you've set aside. Thomas gathered the property documents and architectural plans, handling them with newfound care. This land, it's really mine? Has been since 2008? Completely yours. I've just been its caretaker. And you're really not using the house money. For my wedding? No. Though I will be there, of course, to celebrate your marriage to a woman who, I've discovered, has far more depth and compassion than I initially gave her credit for. Thomas nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I need to think about all this. Talk to Caroline. Of course you do, I agreed. Take the plans, take the deed, visit the property when you're ready. It's even more beautiful than when I purchased it. The trees have matured, and there's a bald eagle nesting near the shoreline. We carefully repacked the box of mementos and brought it downstairs together, neither of us speaking much, both processing the weight of our attic conversation. At the front door, Thomas paused, the property documents tucked securely in his briefcase. Dad, he said hesitantly, I don't know what to say. All these years you've been planning this gift, paying the taxes, keeping this secret. He trailed off, seemingly struggling to articulate his thoughts. You don't need to say anything right now, I replied, resting my hand on his shoulder. Just think about it. About what kind of life you truly want to build with Caroline. He nodded, his expression unusually vulnerable, a glimpse of the boy I'd raised peeking through the polished exterior of the man he'd become. The wedding is in 3 weeks. I know. Will you still give me away? Even after everything? The question caught me off guard. For all his focus on the expensive venue and elaborate details, this was the first time Thomas had referenced any of the traditional, meaningful aspects of the ceremony itself. "Of course I will," I said softly. "You're my son, Thomas. That doesn't change, even when we disappoint each other." He swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought he might embrace me, really embrace me, not the perfunctory gesture he'd offered upon arrival. But the moment passed, and he straightened his shoulders, his professional mask slipping back into place. "I should go," he said. "I'll call you tomorrow." I nodded, not expecting that he actually would. "Drive safely." After he left, I stood in the empty foyer of the house that had been my home for 35 years. That would be someone else's home tomorrow. The silence felt different now, not the hollow emptiness of abandonment, but the quiet pause between one chapter and the next. I'd done what I could. The rest was up to Thomas. Moving day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect spring morning. The movers arrived at 8, professionally and efficiently loading my furniture and boxes into their truck. By noon, the house was empty except for the cleaning supplies I'd kept out to do a final sweep before handing over the keys. As I wiped down kitchen counters that gleamed unfamiliarly without their usual clutter of cookbooks and canisters, my phone rang. Rebecca. "Hey, Dad," her warm voice came through the speaker. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, and was surprised to find it was true. The grief of leaving was real, but not as debilitating as I'd feared. "Almost finished. Cleaning. The new place is ready whenever I am." "And Thomas? Has he figured out yet that you're not actually moving to Peaceful Pines?" I smiled at my daughter's perceptiveness. I'd shared more of my plan with her than with Thomas, knowing she would understand. "We had a long talk yesterday. I showed him the property deed, the house plans." "Wow," she breathed. "How did he take it?" Hard to say for sure. Shocked, certainly. Maybe a little humbled. There was a moment when I thought I might be getting through to him, but he's still Thomas, she finished for me. Pride and all. "He's more complicated than you give him credit for, Becca," I said, finding myself in the familiar position of mediating between my children, even in their 30s. "He revealed something yesterday that made me see his choices differently. Apparently, his drive for financial success stems partly from watching our struggles when you were both growing up." "Struggles? Dad, we had a great childhood. We never lacked for anything important." We knew that, but Thomas saw it differently. The vacations we couldn't afford, the clothes he couldn't have. He interpreted our careful budgeting as deprivation. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I guess we all experience the same family differently," she finally said. "I remember feeling secure and loved. He remembers feeling limited." Exactly. And that perspective shaped the man he became, for better or worse. "Still doesn't excuse pressuring you to sell your home for his ridiculous wedding," she said, a note of her earlier indignation returning. "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "But understanding doesn't require excusing. It just helps me find a path forward with my son." "You're a better person than I am, Dad." I could hear the smile in her voice. "So, what's next? Will you see him before the wedding?" "I'm not sure. The ball is in his court now." After finishing my conversation with Rebecca, I completed the final cleaning, took one last walk through each empty room, and locked the door behind me, leaving the keys in the realtor's lockbox as arranged. My car was packed with the few items I hadn't trusted to the movers: Rose's jewelry box, our wedding album, a small cedar chest containing love letters we'd exchanged over decades. The drive to my new home took about 40 minutes, heading away from the suburbs and toward the lake region. I'd chosen the house carefully, a single-story ranch with a covered porch, set on half an acre with established gardens and a small workshop in the back. It wasn't grand, but it was solid and well-maintained, with enough space for comfort, but not so much that upkeep would become burdensome as I aged. The movers had already arrived and were unloading when I pulled into the driveway. I directed them where to place the larger furniture pieces, and by late afternoon, I was alone again, surrounded by boxes but officially moved in. I was unpacking kitchen items when my phone buzzed with a text message. From Thomas. Need to see the property. Can you meet me there tomorrow? 10 a.m.? No pleasantries, no mention of our conversation yesterday. Typical Thomas, direct and to the point. But the request itself was significant. He wanted to see the land, to stand on soil that had been legally his for 15 years without his knowledge. I texted back, I'll be there. There's a gate with a padlock. Code is your birthday. He replied with just a thumbs-up emoji. That night, I slept in my new home for the first time, in a bedroom arranged differently than the one I'd shared with Rose, but still containing our bed, our nightstands, the reading lamp she'd always preferred to the overhead light. As I drifted off, I felt her presence strongly, not in a supernatural sense, but in the certainty that she would have approved of my actions, my effort to reclaim our son from the hollow success that had claimed him. The lakefront property was even more beautiful in the spring sunshine than I remembered from my last visit several months ago. The trees were budding with new leaves, wildflowers dotted the meadow leading down to the water, and the lake itself sparkled blue and inviting. I arrived early, parking my car near the padlocked gate, and waited for Thomas. He arrived precisely at 10, his BMW looking incongruously sleek and urban against the natural landscape. He'd dressed casually for once, jeans, a button-down shirt, hiking boots, which I took as a positive sign. At least he understood this wasn't a business meeting. "Morning, Dad," he said as he approached, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Thanks. For meeting me." "Of course," I replied. "Shall we?" I unlocked the gate, and we began walking along the rough track that led through the property to the lake. Thomas was quiet, taking in the towering pines, the glimpses of water through the trees, the chorus of birds overhead. "I've maintained trails through most of the 5 acres, I explained as we walked. The best building site is about a quarter-mile ahead on a small rise overlooking the water. There's a clearing there where you can really appreciate the view." Thomas nodded but still said nothing. When we reached the clearing, he stopped, removing his sunglasses to fully take in the panoramic vista of Lake Windermere stretching before us, bordered by forested hills on the far shore. "This is," he finally spoke, "incredible. Better than I imagined." "The architect positioned the house plans to maximize this view," I said. "Floor-to-ceiling windows in the main living area would frame it perfectly." Thomas turned slowly, surveying the clearing, perhaps envisioning the home that could stand there. "How did you find this place? Back in 2008? "One of my former students was working as a land agent. He called when this parcel came on the market, knowing I'd always loved the lake region. Said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I smiled at the memory. "Your mother and I drove out that same day. The moment we stood in this clearing, we knew it was special. But you didn't buy it for yourselves." "No. We already had our home, but we immediately thought of you, how you'd always loved our summer trips to the lake, how hard you were working in your first job after college." I shrugged. "It seemed like the perfect legacy to build for you, for your future family." Thomas stared out at the water for a long moment. "I came out here yesterday afternoon," he admitted. "After our talk. I wanted to see it alone first, to think. And I realized something standing in this exact spot." He turned to face me fully. "I've spent the last decade chasing a lifestyle I thought would make me happy, that would give me security. But what I've really wanted, what I've pictured when I thought about making it, was something a lot like this." He gestured to the landscape around us. Peace, beauty, a connection to something real. It was more introspection than I'd heard from my son in years. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I talked to Caroline last night. For hours, actually. About the wedding, about the house, about who we want to be as a couple and what kind of life we want to build. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was working through something difficult. She told me she's been concerned about the direction of my career for a while. The hours, the stress, the person I become when I'm chasing a deal. She's observant, I noted, and she cares about you. More than I realized, he admitted. More than I've probably deserved lately. What did you decide? About the wedding? Thomas smiled wryly. We're scaling it back, significantly. No Westbrook. Country club. No 7-piece orchestra. No 300 guests. We're moving it here, actually. He gestured to the clearing around us. If that's okay with you. I stared at him in surprise. Here? On the property? It's mine, right? Has been for 15 years. There was a hint of his old confidence in the statement, but tempered with something new. Humility, perhaps. We thought we'd set up a simple tent, invite 50 people who truly matter to us, and get married overlooking the lake. Caroline called it getting back to what matters. For a moment, I couldn't speak, overcome with emotion at the glimpse of my son, my real son, emerging from behind the facade he'd maintained for so long. I think that sounds perfect, I finally managed. Your mother would have loved it. There's more, Thomas continued. I'm taking a leave of absence from the bank. 3 months, starting after the honeymoon. Caroline and I are going to use that time to really think about what we want, about the kind of life we want to build. He gestured around us, including whether we want to build that house you had designed or something different, something that reflects who we are now. That's a big change, I said carefully, not wanting to overreact and push him back into defensiveness. It's terrifying, actually, he admitted with a small laugh. I've defined myself by that job, that success, for so long. But standing here, seeing what could be, he shook his head. Dad, when you showed me those documents yesterday, I was angry at first. Felt like you were manipulating me, teaching me some kind of lesson. I can understand that. But then I realized you and Mom did this out of love, pure love, with no agenda other than wanting me to have something meaningful, something that would bring real joy. His voice caught slightly. And I've been so caught up in status and appearances that I almost missed it completely. I stepped forward and placed my hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. It's never too late to change course, son. Trust me on that. I'm trying, he said. I'm really trying. We stood together looking out over the lake, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore the only sound. After a while, Thomas spoke again, his voice quieter. I owe you an apology, Dad. For pressuring you to sell the house, for prioritizing my wedding over your home, for a lot of things, really. Apology accepted, I said simply, though I think you owe one to yourself as well, for the parts of yourself you've neglected all these years. He nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's what this time off is really about. Reconnecting with the person I used to be, the values I used to hold. I'd like to get to know that person again, I said. I've missed him. Thomas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Me too, Dad. Me too. We walked the entire property together after that, Thomas asking questions about the building restrictions, the seasonal changes, the wildlife. As we circled back toward our cars, he brought up a subject I hadn't expected. I want you to keep some of the money from the house sale, he said. The scholarship fund in Mom's name is perfect, and I fully support that. But you should have a cushion too, not just the bare minimum for your retirement. I'll be fine, I assured him. My pension, Social Security, and what I've set aside will cover my needs. The new house is fully paid for. Still, he insisted, let me contribute. Not to the house. I understand that ship has sailed, but to your future security. After all, You've been paying property taxes on my land for 15 years. I considered his offer, recognizing it for what it was, not financial assistance, but a gesture of reconciliation, a way to begin restoring balance to our relationship. All right, I agreed, but on one condition. What's that? That you and Caroline come to dinner at my new place next week. I want to get to know my future daughter-in-law better, especially now that I see how wise she truly is. Thomas laughed. Deal. Though, fair warning, now that she's embraced this simpler wedding concept, she has about 1,000 questions about logistics. Expect to be consulted on everything from tent placement to wildflower arrangements. I look forward to it, I said truthfully. As we reached our cars, Thomas hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced me. Not the quick, perfunctory hug he'd offered at the house, but a real embrace, tight and meaningful. Thank you, he said against my shoulder. For not giving up on me, for believing the person I used to be is still in here somewhere. He is, I said firmly. He always has been. Part 3. The wedding. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Thomas canceled the elaborate Westbrook Country Club wedding, forfeiting substantial deposits in the process, but showing no regret about the decision. He and Caroline threw themselves into planning the new lakeside ceremony with an enthusiasm that seemed to energize them both. I found myself unexpectedly central to the preparations, as the property became the focus of their vision. Thomas and Caroline visited my new home for dinner as promised, and what I'd expected to be a single evening turned into regular planning sessions, with the three of us poring over sketches of the tent layout, discussing catering options. Now, a local farm-to-table restaurant rather than the 5-star hotel originally booked, and addressing the practical considerations of an outdoor wedding in a relatively undeveloped location. We'll need to bring in portable restrooms, Caroline said during one such session, making notes in the leather-bound planner that seemed permanently attached to her. But not those awful blue plastic ones. There are actually luxury options available, like tiny houses with real fixtures, air conditioning, even music. And we'll need a generator for the lights, the sound system, and the catering equipment, Thomas added. Don't forget parking, I reminded them. The access road can only handle single-file traffic. It was during these planning conversations that I truly got to know Caroline, her intelligence, her organizational skills, but also her warmth and surprising sense of humor. She approached the wedding replanning not as a downgrade, but as an exciting challenge, embracing the natural setting and the intimacy of a smaller guest list. Honestly, she confided to me one evening while Thomas was on a call with the tent company, I'm relieved. The Westbrook wedding was becoming this performance. More about impressing Thomas's colleagues and my parents' friends than about us. This feels real. Thomas, too, seemed to be shedding layers of the hard-driving banker persona with each passing day. He still worked long hours. The leave of absence wouldn't begin until after the honeymoon. But he spoke about his job differently, with more perspective and less all-consuming intensity. And he made time for wedding planning, for dinners at my new home, for Sunday morning walks around the lake property, gradually reconnecting with the parts of himself he'd set aside in his pursuit of success. The most significant change came 2 weeks before the wedding, when Thomas and Caroline invited both sets of parents to dinner at their apartment. Rebecca and her family flew in from Seattle to join us, making it a complete family gathering. Over a meal Thomas had cooked himself, another surprise, he and Caroline made an announcement that left the table momentarily speechless. We've decided to build on the lake property, Caroline began, but not the house in those original plans. We're working with an architect to design something smaller, more sustainable, Thomas continued. A home that reflects our values, not just our budget. Caroline's father, a successful businessman himself, looked skeptical. Smaller? But that land could support a magnificent estate. The resale value alone. We're not thinking about resale value, Dad, Caroline interrupted gently. We're thinking about the life we want to build, the family we hope to have someday. A house that's a home, not a status symbol. And we're establishing a foundation, Thomas added, looking directly at me. The Rose Sullivan Education Trust will be more than just a scholarship fund at Dad's former high school. We want to expand it to support education initiatives throughout the county, focusing on students with financial need and academic promise. I felt tears spring to my eyes, hastily blinking them away. Your mother would be honored, I said simply. It's her legacy, Thomas replied. And yours. The values you both tried to instill in me. That education matters more than possessions. That purpose outweighs prestige. That how we treat others defines us more than what we achieve. Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze her brother's hand, a gesture of reconciliation after years of growing distance between them. Welcome back, Tommy, she said softly, using his childhood nickname. Later, as we were leaving, Thomas pulled me aside. There's one more thing we'd like to do if you're willing. Of course, I said. Anything. We want to build you a small guest house on the property. Nothing elaborate. Just a one-bedroom cottage near the main house we're planning. Close enough for visits and family gatherings, but with your own private space. I stared at him, deeply touched by the gesture. Thomas, that's not necessary. I have my new home. I know, he interrupted. And we respect that. This wouldn't be instead of your house, it would be in addition to it. A place for extended stays, for holidays, for when you want to be closer to family, but still maintain your independence. He smiled. Caroline's already sketching ideas. She's thinking a stone cottage with a reading nook overlooking the lake. Says it has Richard energy, whatever that means. I laughed, genuinely moved by their thoughtfulness. I'd be honored. Thank you. The day before the wedding dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of crystalline blue sky that seems unique to early summer. The property had been transformed. A white tent erected in the clearing overlooking the lake, rustic wooden chairs arranged in rows for the ceremony, wildflowers and greenery adorning every surface. Strings of Edison bulbs hung from the tent ceiling and neighboring trees, ready to create a warm glow as evening fell. Thomas had spent the night at my new house, honoring the tradition of not seeing the bride before the wedding, while Caroline stayed with her parents at a nearby lake house they'd rented for the weekend. As we ate breakfast on my porch, Thomas seemed unusually reflective. I can't help thinking about how different tomorrow would have been if we'd stuck with the original plan, he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. 300 people, most of whom I barely know. A 7-course meal that no one would remember. Thousands of dollars in flowers that would be thrown away the next day. And now? I prompted. Now it's just us. The people who matter most. In our lives, in a place that has meaning. Celebrating something real. He looked out over my modest garden, where roses, transplanted from my old house, were beginning to bloom. I think I lost sight of what real means for a long time, Dad. It happens, I said gently. The world is very good at convincing us that external markers of success, money, status, possessions, are what define us. It takes wisdom to see beyond that. Wisdom I apparently lacked, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Wisdom you're finding, I corrected. That's what matters. After breakfast, we drove to the property for final preparations. The catering team was setting up. The photographer, now a local artist known for nature photography rather than the celebrity wedding photographer originally booked, was scouting locations, and the small group of close friends who formed the wedding party were gathering for a relaxed rehearsal. As the afternoon progressed, I watched my son, truly saw him for perhaps the first time in years. The way he greeted each arrival personally, the care he took ensuring every detail was perfect not for appearances, but for meaning, the genuine joy that seemed to emanate from him as the moment approached. This was the Thomas I remembered. The Thomas I had feared was lost to ambition and external validation. He was different, certainly. A grown man now, not the idealistic boy of my memories. But the essential qualities were resurging: kindness, thoughtfulness, and appreciation for what truly matters. That evening, after the rehearsal dinner, a casual barbecue by the lake rather than the formal affair originally planned, Thomas and I sat on the dock, feet dangling above the water, sharing a bottle of good scotch as darkness fell. "Nervous?" I asked. "Not about marrying Caroline," he replied immediately. "That's the one thing I'm absolutely certain about." He took a sip of his drink. "But I do have concerns about whether I can maintain this perspective, this clarity, once I go back to work. About whether the changes I'm trying to make will stick." It was a vulnerable admission, one the Thomas of 6 weeks ago would never have made. "Change isn't a one-time decision," I said. "It's a series of choices made day after day. There will be setbacks, moments when old patterns reassert themselves. The key is recognizing them and correcting course." "How do you know all this?" Thomas asked, a hint of his old wry humor returning. "From teaching teenagers for 40 years? I laughed. "Partly, but mostly from living long enough to make plenty of mistakes and occasionally learn from them." "I'm trying to learn from mine," he said quietly, "before I repeat them." "I know you are. And that's why I believe in you, in the life you and Caroline are building." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the moon rise over the lake, its reflection creating a silvery path across the water. "Dad," Thomas said finally, "thank you. Not just for the property, though that's, well, beyond generous. But for not giving up on me. For caring enough to create this elaborate plan to help me see what I was becoming." "That's what fathers do," I said simply. "We hold up mirrors so our children can see themselves clearly, both their potential and their missteps. I hope I can be that kind of father someday," he said. And in that quiet admission, I heard everything I needed to know about the man my son was becoming. The wedding day itself was magic. There's no other word for it. Under a perfect blue sky, with the lake sparkling behind them, Thomas and Caroline exchanged vows they had written themselves, speaking of partnership, growth, and building a meaningful life together. Caroline, radiant in a simple white dress, had tears in her eyes as Thomas promised to prioritize their relationship above career ambitions and material success. Thomas's voice broke as Caroline vowed to remind him of his true self whenever the world threatened to pull him off course. When they asked me to offer a blessing after their vows, I spoke from my heart, sharing wisdom from my years with Rose, encouraging them to measure success not by what they accumulated, but by how they loved each other and those around them. Looking out at the intimate gathering, family, close friends, a few colleagues who had proven themselves true friends rather than mere networking connections, I felt Rose's presence keenly, her approval of this moment, this recentering of our son's life. The celebration that followed was joyful, relaxed, and deeply personal. Under the tent adorned with wildflowers and twinkling lights, we shared a meal prepared from local ingredients, toasted the couple with heartfelt speeches rather than formal platitudes, and danced to music played by friends of Thomas's from college, talented musicians who had pursued their passion rather than conventional success. As evening deepened, Thomas and Caroline took their first dance as husband and wife, on a wooden platform positioned to overlook the lake. The song they had chosen, one that had been meaningful during their courtship, filled the air as they moved together, lost in each other's eyes, the rest of us momentarily forgotten. Standing at the edge of the gathering, I felt a presence beside me and turned to find Rebecca, watching her brother with a soft smile. "You did it, Dad," she said, slipping her arm through mine. "You brought him back to himself." "He brought himself back," I corrected. "With Caroline's help. created an opportunity for clarity. By letting him think he was forcing you to sell your house for his wedding, while actually holding the deed to his dream property. She shook her head, amused. It was brilliantly devious. Mom would have loved it. I laughed softly. She would have, wouldn't she? She always did appreciate a good lesson wrapped in natural consequences. As the evening progressed, I found myself sitting with Caroline's father, a man I had initially judged as materialistic and status-driven based on his business success and the lavish wedding he had been prepared to fund. Now, watching him observe his daughter's genuine happiness, I saw complexity I had missed before. "My wife tells me you planned this whole thing," he said, gesturing with his glass to encompass the property, the wedding, the transformation in the couple. "That you've had this land in Thomas's name for years, waiting for the right moment." "That might be overstating my foresight somewhat," I admitted. "But yes, the property has been his since 2008. My late wife and I always intended it as a gift for when he was ready to appreciate it properly." Caroline's father nodded thoughtfully. "Clever and effective." He took a sip of his drink. "You know, I was disappointed at first when they canceled the Westbrook wedding. Thought they were making a mistake, scaling back like this. But seeing them today..." He trailed off, watching as Thomas and Caroline, still in their wedding attire, stood at the edge of the lake with arms around each other, silhouetted against the sunset. "This is real happiness, isn't it? Not the manufactured kind we sometimes mistake for it." "I believe so," I agreed. "And ultimately, that's what we want. For our children, isn't it? Not just success or status, but genuine fulfillment." "Indeed." He offered his hand. "I think our kids have chosen well in each other, and I look forward to seeing what they build here, both literally and figuratively." As the celebration continued into the night, I found a quiet moment to slip, away to the edge of the property, to a bench Thomas and I had positioned specifically for its view of both the lake and the clearing where the wedding was taking place. From this vantage point, I could see the entire gathering, the tent glowing with warm light, figures moving in and out of shadows as they danced, laughter and music carrying across the still night air. "We did good, Rose," I said softly to the stars above. He found his way back. The breeze that rustled the leaves around me might have been coincidence, or it might have been something more. Either way, I felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. My son had pushed me to sell my home for his wedding, not knowing I held the deed to his dream property. But what had begun as a lesson in consequences had transformed into something far more meaningful, a reclamation of values, a reshaping of priorities, a return to authenticity. As I made my way back to the celebration, Thomas spotted me and broke away from a conversation, meeting me halfway. "Everything okay, Dad?" he asked. "You disappeared for a bit." "Everything is perfect," I assured him. Just taking a moment to appreciate how beautifully this all came together. He looked around at the gathering, at the property that was now truly his in more than just legal deed, at the life he was consciously choosing rather than merely accumulating. "It did, didn't it?" he agreed. "Though not at all how I expected when I first brought up the wedding plans." "Life rarely follows the path we expect," I said. "The joy is in discovering that the unexpected route often leads to exactly where we needed to be." Thomas smiled, placing his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that echoed the countless times I had done the same for him throughout his life. "I'm glad you'll be nearby, Dad, in your new house and eventually in the guest cottage here. I have a feeling I'll still need your wisdom for a long time to come. And I'll need to learn from you too," I replied. "That's how family works. We grow together across generations, each contributing what we've learned along the way." As we rejoined the celebration, I watched Thomas move through the gathering, embracing friends, thanking guests for coming, eventually finding his way back to Caroline's side as if drawn by an invisible thread. The ambitious banker was still there in his confident stance, his articulate speech, his natural leadership. But now those qualities were tempered with genuine connection, with presence, with an appreciation for what truly constitutes a rich life. My son had forced me to sell my house for his wedding, but he hadn't known I had the deed to his dream home, a physical property, yes, but also a metaphor for the life he truly wanted, the person he genuinely was beneath layers of ambition and expectation. And in that unexpected exchange, we had both received the gifts we most needed. Him, a return to authentic values. Me, the joy of seeing my son reclaim his true self and build a life founded on meaning rather than appearance. As Rose would have said, some lessons cost dearly but pay dividends for a lifetime. This one, it seemed, would continue to yield returns for generations to come. 2 years later, the morning mist rose slowly from the lake, revealing the silhouette of a house taking shape on the rise. No longer just architectural drawings or foundation markers, Thomas and Caroline's home had walls now, windows, a roof that echoed the gentle slope of the surrounding hills. It wasn't the grand mansion from the original plans, but something more, thoughtful, a blend of modern efficiency and natural materials that seemed to emerge organically from the landscape. I watched the progress from the porch of my cottage, a cup of coffee warming my hands against the early autumn chill. The guest house Thomas had promised had been completed 6 months ago, a charming stone structure with more architectural character than my primary residence in town. I'd taken to spending weekends here, sometimes extending into weeks when the beauty of the changing seasons proved too compelling to leave. "Morning, Dad," Thomas called, appearing on the path that connected our dwellings. He wore work clothes and carried a thermos, his weekend uniform these days. "You're up early." "Old habits," I replied as he climbed the steps to join me. "How's the insulation coming along?" "Finished the south wall yesterday. Should get the west side done today if the weather holds." He poured himself coffee from my pot, settling into the adjacent rocking chair. "Caroline's picking up Rebecca and the family from the airport at noon." Rebecca and her family visited. Quarterly now, their connection to Thomas and Caroline strengthened by the events of the wedding and everything that had followed. Emily, their daughter, had become particularly attached to the lake property, spending hours exploring the forests and shoreline during their visits. "Need any help with the insulation?" I offered, knowing he'd refuse but asking anyway. "Thanks, but I've got it covered. Jason and Mike are coming by to lend a hand." Jason and Mike, friends from Thomas's college days, now part of his regular life again after years of neglect during his most intense banking phase. We rocked in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher over the lake. These quiet moments had become a cherished ritual, father and son, sharing space without agenda or expectation, simply being together in the peace of early morning. "Hard to believe it's been 2 years," Thomas reflected. "Since the wedding, since everything changed." "Good years," I observed. He nodded thoughtfully. "The best, though not without challenges." The challenges had indeed been significant. Thomas's leave of absence from the bank had extended from 3 months to 6 as he and Caroline reconsidered their priorities. Eventually, he'd return to finance but in a dramatically different capacity, joining a smaller firm focused on sustainable investments and ethical business practices. The salary was lower, the prestige less dazzling, but the work aligned with his rediscovered values in ways his previous position never had. Caroline, too, had made changes, leaving her corporate legal practice to join a nonprofit focused on educational equity, a shift that connected directly to the Rose Sullivan Education Trust they'd established. The trust had already provided scholarships to 14 students from my former high school, several of whom had become regular visitors to the lake property, receiving mentorship from Thomas and Caroline along with financial support. "Any word on the adoption application?" I asked gently, knowing it was a tender subject. Thomas's smile was cautiously optimistic. "We have another meeting with the agency next week. Our caseworker says things are looking positive, but we're trying not to get our hopes too high." After a year of marriage, Thomas and Caroline had begun discussing children. Fertility challenges had led them toward adoption, specifically, the adoption of older children from the foster system, a choice that reflected their evolving priorities and desire to make a meaningful difference. "It will happen when it's meant to," I said, "and those children will be incredibly fortunate to have you both as parents." "If it happens," Thomas cautioned. "The process is rigorous, as it should be." "As it should be," I agreed. "But I've seen how you and Caroline approach this with thoughtfulness, preparation, genuine commitment. That kind of intention tends to find its way." He nodded, taking a long sip of coffee before changing the subject. "Have you given any more thought to the book?" Ah, the book. A project that had begun almost accidentally when I started writing, down memories of Rose for my own comfort after selling our family home. Thomas had discovered the manuscript during a visit to my house in town, reading it without permission, a boundary violation he'd later apologized for profusely. And then, insisting I develop it further. "A bit," I admitted. "I've been working on the chapter about our early years of parenting. It's challenging to capture the complexity of that time." "It's going to be wonderful, Dad. You're writing about Mom, about family, about what matters. It resonates. Not just for me, but for anyone trying to navigate life's big questions." "We'll see," I said, still uncomfortable with his enthusiasm for what had begun as a deeply personal exercise. It might just remain a family heirloom rather than a published work. Thomas respected my reticence, though I knew he remained convinced. The manuscript had broader value. His support had evolved from the perfunctory encouragement of our estranged years to genuine engagement, asking thoughtful questions about specific passages, offering insights about his own memories of the events I described, creating space for me to pursue this unexpected creative endeavor. The sound of a car approaching drew our attention. Caroline arrived earlier than expected, parking beside Thomas's truck in the cleared area that served as our shared driveway. "Change of plans," she called as she emerged from the vehicle, her face alight with excitement. "Rebecca's flight got in early. They're already on their way from the airport with a rental car." Thomas rose to greet his wife, embracing her with the natural affection that now characterized their relationship. "Everything else ready for the weekend? Groceries are in the car, guest rooms are prepared, and—" She paused dramatically, pulling an envelope from her bag. "This came yesterday while you were working on the house." Thomas took the envelope, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock as he read its contents. "It's from the adoption agency. They've matched us with siblings, a brother and sister, ages 7 and 9. I stood, moved by the emotion in my son's voice. "Thomas, that's wonderful news. They want us to meet the children next month," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "to begin the formal introduction process." Caroline's eyes shone with happy tears. The timing couldn't be more perfect. If all goes well with the introductions, they could potentially be with us by the time the house is completed. "What are their names?" I asked, already imagining new young voices echoing across the property, new chapters unfolding on this land that had become the setting for our family's renewal. "Lily and James," Thomas said softly. "They've been in foster care for nearly 3 years. Their file says they're bright, resilient kids who've stayed close despite multiple placements. Siblings who protect each other," Caroline added. "Who've formed their own family bond in difficult circumstances." The significance wasn't lost on any of us. Thomas and Rebecca, despite their differences and periods of distance, had maintained their connection through the years. Now, Thomas might have the opportunity to provide a stable home for another sibling pair, to ensure they remained together in a permanent family. "We were going to wait to share the news until everyone was here this weekend," Caroline explained. "But I couldn't hold it in any longer." "This calls for a proper celebration," I said. "Let me get a bottle of champagne from the cottage." Make it two, Thomas called after me. One for now, and one for when Rebecca arrives. As I retrieved the champagne from my small refrigerator, I glanced at the framed photo on my bookshelf. Rose on our 30th anniversary, her smile radiant despite the cancer that would claim her just months later. "You'd be so proud of him," I whispered to her image, "of the man he's become, the life he's building." By the time I returned to the porch, Thomas and Caroline had moved to the wooden bench overlooking the lake, their heads close together as they reviewed the contents of the envelope. Their body language spoke volumes. The gentle way Caroline's hand rested on Thomas's arm, the protective curve of his shoulder as he leaned toward her, the synchronicity of their movements suggesting a partnership built on deep, mutual respect. How different from the driven, status-conscious couple who had pressured me to sell my home for their extravagant wedding. That Thomas and Caroline had been focused on appearance, acquisition, external validation. These two were rooted in purpose, connection, authentic values. "Here we are," I said, approaching with glasses and champagne. "A toast seems in order." As I poured, Thomas looked up at me with an expression that took me back decades, to the little boy who'd proudly shown me his first perfectly tied shoelaces, to the teenager who'd been accepted to his dream college, to the young man who'd found his Rose in Caroline. "Dad," he said, "I was just telling Caroline. If the adoption goes through, if Lily and James become our children, we want to name the trust after both you and Mom. The Richard and Rose Sullivan Education Trust. Because this journey, all of it, began with both of you. With the values you lived, the examples you set, the love you shared." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. That would be a great honor, though you've made this journey your own, Thomas. You and Caroline. With significant course correction from you, Caroline said with a warm smile. Let's not forget the elaborate plan that brought us all here. A plan born of desperation, I admitted. I never imagined it would lead to all this. Thomas raised his glass. To unexpected journeys, then, and to family, those we're born to, those we choose, and those who may soon join us. To family, Caroline and I echoed, our glasses catching the morning light as they clinked together. As we sipped champagne in the autumn sunshine, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. The path here had been winding, sometimes painful, marked by losses and misunderstandings. But standing on this property, Thomas's property, though he insisted on calling it ours collectively, I could see how each turn in the road had been necessary, each challenge an opportunity for growth and realignment. My son had once forced me to sell my house for his wedding, not knowing I held the deed to his dream home. What had begun as a calculated lesson had blossomed into something far richer, a family healing, a values renaissance, a future unfolding with unexpected beauty. Rose would have called it divine timing. Thomas might attribute it to strategic planning finally bearing fruit. Caroline, always practical, would point to the power of honest communication and intentional choices. For me, it was simply affirmation that love, when expressed with wisdom and courage, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but generations to come. That sometimes the most valuable inheritance we leave our children isn't property or possessions, but the example of a life well lived, and the occasional well-timed intervention when they stray too far from their authentic path. The sound of another vehicle approaching signaled Rebecca's arrival. Thomas and Caroline rose to greet them, champagne glasses still in hand, faces alight with joy at the reunion and the news they were eager to share. I remained seated for a moment longer, taking in the fullness of the scene. The house rising, on the hill, the cottage that had become my weekend sanctuary, the lake sparkling in the distance, and most importantly, the people gathering here, bound by love and shared purpose. We did it, Rose, I whispered, a private toast to the woman who had helped me raise this family, who had inspired the purchase of this land so many years ago. We really did it. Then I rose to join the embrace of family, past, present, and future converging in this moment of pure, unexpected grace. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter rang across the lake property, carrying on the summer breeze like music. From my perch on the cottage porch, I could see Lily and James racing along the shoreline, their adopted dog Rusty bounding after them, sending spray into the golden afternoon light. At 12 and 14 now, they had blossomed in the 5 years since Thomas and Caroline had welcomed them into their family. Lily, the younger, had Thomas's determined spirit and Caroline's analytical mind, a combination that made her formidable in both academics and the soccer matches she played with fierce dedication. James, more reserved by nature, had discovered a passion for photography, documenting the changing seasons of the lake with an artist's eye that belied his youth. "Grandpa!" Lily called, spotting me on the porch. "Come see what we found." Despite my 77 years and increasingly troublesome knee, I couldn't resist their summons. I made my way carefully down the stone path that Thomas had widened and smoothed specifically for my ease of movement. "What treasure have you discovered today?" I asked as I approached. James held out his hands, cradling something with great care. "We think it's a baby turtle," he explained, his voice soft with wonder. It was trying to make its way to the water. I leaned close to examine the tiny creature, indeed a snapping turtle hatchling, its shell still soft, its movements determined despite its vulnerability. "A common snapping turtle," I confirmed. "They nest up in the sandy areas near the woods, and the babies have to make it all the way to the water on their own." "Can we help it?" Lily asked, her expression concerned. "It has so far to go." "Actually," I said, "it's usually best to let nature take its course. The journey to the water is important for the turtle's development and instincts." James nodded seriously. "Like how monarch butterflies have to struggle out of their chrysalis to strengthen their wings. If you help them, they can't fly properly." "Exactly right," I said, impressed by his knowledge. "But we can watch over this little one. Make sure no predators get it while it makes its journey." And so we 3 settled on the shore, providing a protective presence as the tiny turtle made its determined way across the sand and pebbles. James documented the journey with his camera, while Lily created a small barrier with sticks to guide the hatchling toward the water. "Grandpa," Lily said as we watched, "Dad says you used to be a history teacher. Do you think you could help me with my end-of-summer project? I have to create a family history timeline, and I want mine to be really good." "I'd be honored," I replied, touched by the request. "We can start tomorrow morning if you like. I have some old photo albums at the cottage that might be useful." "Could we include Mom and Dad's wedding?" James asked. "That's when our family really started, even though we weren't here yet." "Of course," I said, smiling at his perception. That was certainly a pivotal moment. The turtle finally reached the water's edge, pausing briefly before disappearing into the lake with surprising speed. We all cheered its successful journey, and I couldn't help but see it as a metaphor for our own family's path. Difficult at times, requiring determination and occasional protective presence, but ultimately leading to where we were meant to be. As we made our way back toward the houses, I marveled at how thoroughly the property had transformed in the years since Thomas and Caroline's wedding. Their home, completed 3 years ago, sat beautifully on its rise overlooking the lake. Modern yet timeless, with generous windows that brought nature inside and an open design that accommodated both family life and the frequent gatherings they hosted. My cottage, positioned to have its own privacy while remaining connected to the main house, had become my primary residence about 2 years ago. I still maintained my house in town, but spent less and less time there, drawn by both the natural beauty of the lake and the magnetic pull of family life unfolding daily around me. Between the 2 structures, Thomas had created a shared outdoor living space with a fire pit, comfortable seating, and a long farm table where we often gathered for meals. Native plantings surrounded the area, attracting butterflies and birds. creating a sense of being embraced by the landscape rather than imposed upon it. "There you all are," Caroline called from the outdoor kitchen area where she was preparing dinner. I was about to send out a search party. "We were helping a baby turtle," Lily explained excitedly. "James took pictures." "Can't wait to see them," Caroline replied with genuine interest. She had mastered the art of being fully present with the children while managing her work with the Education Trust, which had grown significantly under her leadership. "Why don't you go wash up? Dinner in about 20 minutes. As the children raced off toward the house, Caroline handed me a glass of iced tea. "Thanks for entertaining them, Richard. Thomas had a work call he couldn't reschedule." "It's never a hardship," I assured her. "They're wonderful company." Caroline smiled, the last 5 years having softened her once sharp professional edges, while deepening the natural warmth that had initially drawn Thomas to her. "They adore you, you know. James was telling his science teacher all about your lake lessons last semester, how you taught him about watersheds and ecosystems using the property as a classroom. He has a natural curiosity," I said proudly. "Both of them do. You and Thomas have done remarkable work as parents." "Some days are better than others," she admitted with a laugh. "Lily tested every boundary last week when we told her she couldn't go to soccer camp with an unhealed sprained ankle." "That sounds like another determined 12-year-old I once knew," came Thomas's voice as he emerged from the house, "who refused to leave the baseball field despite a fever of 101 because his team was counting on him." "I have no idea what you're talking about," I replied innocently. Thomas joined us, kissing Caroline briefly before helping himself to iced tea. At 42, my son had settled into a confident maturity. The driven intensity of his banking days had transformed into focused purpose. His hair had threads of silver at the temples now, and laugh lines had formed around his eyes, evidence of a life increasingly filled with joy. "How was the call?" Caroline asked. "Productive. The investment group is on board with the Affordable Housing development. We should be able to break ground this fall." Thomas had recently co-founded an investment collective focused on ethical community development, his latest evolution away from traditional finance toward work that aligned with his rediscovered values. "That's the one near your old high school, isn't it, Dad?" he asked me. I nodded. "That neighborhood has needed revitalization for decades. It's good to see it happening in a way that won't displace the existing community." "We're making sure of that," Thomas assured me. "Fixed-rate mortgages for qualifying current residents, subsidized units for seniors, and a community center with after-school programming connected to the Education Trust." "Speaking of the trust," Caroline interjected, "the first cohort of Rose Sullivan scholars are all graduating college this year. We're planning a celebration here next month." The Rose and Richard Sullivan Education Trust, renamed as Thomas had proposed 5 years ago, had expanded beyond its initial scholarship program to include mentorship, internship placement, and community service initiatives. The 14 students from the original high school cohort had been joined by dozens more across the county, creating a network of young people committed to both educational achievement and giving back. "I'm so proud of them," I said, thinking of the students I'd come to know through the Trust's programs, and grateful that Rose's legacy continues in such a meaningful way. "Your legacy too, Dad," Thomas reminded me. "The book has become required reading for all our scholars." Ah, the book. What had begun as private reminiscences about Rose had eventually become meaningful measures, reflections on a life of purpose and connection, a memoir published 3 years ago that had found an unexpected audience among readers seeking wisdom about family, values, and authentic living. Thomas had been right about its broader appeal, though I still felt slightly uncomfortable with the attention it had garnered. "Dad's too modest to acknowledge it," Thomas told Caroline with a grin. "But I heard from Marcus at the bookstore that there's a waiting list for his upcoming reading." "It's a small bookstore in a small town," I protested. "Hardly a literary event." "Accept it, Richard," Caroline said warmly. You've become something of a local philosopher. People connect with your story, with your perspective on what constitutes a meaningful life. Before I could respond, dinner preparations were interrupted by the arrival of Rebecca and her family, their car pulling into the shared driveway. Their quarterly visits had become monthly in recent years, and this summer they were spending 3 consecutive weeks at the lake, their longest stay yet. "Sorry we're late," Rebecca called as she emerged from the car, her wife Sarah and their daughter Emily following. "Someone insisted on stopping for those homemade chocolates from the shop in town." "Guilty," Sarah admitted with a laugh. "But I brought enough to share." Emily, now 16 and as tall as her mother's, immediately sought out James and Lily, the 3 cousins having formed a tight bond despite the geographic distance that usually separated them. As our expanded family gathered around the outdoor table for dinner, I looked at the faces illuminated by the string lights Thomas had hung from the surrounding trees. My children, their spouses, my grandchildren, both biological and adopted. The conversation flowed easily, moving from school updates to work projects to plans for the remaining weeks of summer. "We have news," Rebecca announced as we finished the main course. She glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "We're moving." Back east, a moment of surprised silence was followed by excited questions from everyone at once. Rebecca raised her hands, laughing. "One at a time. Yes, it's definite. Sarah's been offered a position at the University Medical Center, and I can transfer, within my company. We'll be less than 2 hours from here." The announcement sent a wave of joy around the table. Thomas immediately began talking about potential houses in their price range near the university, while Caroline and Sarah discussed the medical center's research facilities. The children excitedly planned all the things they would do together once they lived closer. I caught Rebecca's eye across the table, and she smiled at me. A private acknowledgement of how far we had all come, how completely our family had been restored and expanded in ways none of us could have imagined when Thomas first pressured me to sell my house for his wedding. Later, as evening deepened and the younger generation moved to the fire pit for s'mores, I found myself seated between Thomas and Rebecca on the porch of my cottage, watching the flames cast dancing light on the faces of our family. "I never expected this," Rebecca said softly. "When Thomas first called me about your house being sold, I was so angry. I thought we'd lost you to his ambitions, to his disconnect from what really mattered." "You weren't entirely wrong," Thomas admitted. "I was lost myself back then. Chasing external validation, status, a warped version of success. And now look at us," she marveled. "Living closer, our children growing up together, building something meaningful. All because Dad had the deed to your dream property and the wisdom to use it at exactly the right moment," Thomas said, raising his glass in my direction. "I had no idea it would unfold this way," I confessed. "I just knew I needed to try something dramatic to reach you, to help you remember who you really were beneath all those layers of ambition and status seeking." "The perfect teaching moment," Rebecca said. "Once a teacher, always a teacher." "I prefer to think of it as once a father, always a father," I replied. "The teaching was just the method. The love was the motivation." Thomas placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that had become frequent. In recent years, a physical connection that spoke of respect, affection, and appreciation. "Well, your method worked," he said. "Though I still can't believe you let me think I was forcing you to sell your home while you secretly held the deed to this property. It was brilliant and slightly devious." "I learned from the best," I said with a smile. "Your mother was the real strategist in our family. She always said that when direct conversation fails, sometimes you need to create circumstances that allow for deeper understanding." "I wish she could see all this," Rebecca said wistfully. "The family we've become, the work the trust is doing in her name, the children." "She sees," I said with quiet certainty. "Not in any supernatural way, perhaps, but in the continuation, of what she valued. In the living legacy she created through both of you, through the grandchildren, through the values that have found new expression in each generation. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the younger generation around the fire, listening to their laughter and animated conversations. Emily was showing James something on her camera, likely photography tips from her high school visual arts program. Lily was teaching Sarah a complicated friendship bracelet pattern. The dog lay stretched out contentedly between them all, occasionally raising his head when a marshmallow was mentioned. "Dad," Thomas said, breaking the silence, "Caroline and I have been talking. We'd like to expand the property." "Oh?" I responded, curious about this new development. "The parcel adjacent to ours has come up for sale, the old Peterson place with the apple orchard. We're thinking of purchasing it, creating a proper family compound." He glanced at Rebecca. "Especially now that these two are moving back east. They could build there if they wanted, or we could renovate the existing farmhouse." "That's incredibly generous," Rebecca said, clearly surprised by the offer. "But we couldn't possibly." "Consider it an investment in our future," Thomas interrupted, gently. "In our children's futures. This place has become the heart of our family. Why not expand it to include all of us more permanently?" I watched the siblings discussing this new possibility, marveling at how completely Thomas's attitude toward property and money had transformed. Once, he had viewed my home as an asset to be liquidated for his short-term benefit. Now, he saw property as a means of creating permanence, connection, legacy, a vessel for what truly mattered rather than a symbol of status or success. "What do you think, Dad?" Thomas asked, turning to me. "I think your mother would be thrilled," I said. Truthfully, she always wanted a gathering place for the family, somewhere that would draw everyone back together regularly across the years. "The Sullivan family compound," Rebecca mused, warming to the idea. "It does have a nice ring to it. Though we'd have to include the Wilson Sullivans and Hayes Sullivans properly," Thomas added, referring to Rebecca's married name and his own. "Details," Rebecca said with a wave of her hand. "The important thing is creating space for all of us and for whatever the future brings." As they continued discussing the possibilities, renovations versus new construction, shared spaces versus private retreats, how to incorporate sustainable features throughout, I felt a profound sense of completion. The deed to this property, purchased so many years ago as a future gift for my son, had indeed become exactly that, but in ways far richer and more meaningful than Rose and I could ever have imagined. What began as 5 acres for Thomas had expanded in vision to encompass our entire family, multiple generations, and a foundation that helped dozens of deserving students each year. The property had become not just a physical place, but a manifestation of our reconnection to what truly mattered, to authentic values, purposeful living, and genuine connection. "You're quiet, Dad," Thomas observed. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that land has always been more than just real estate," I replied. "It's opportunity, legacy, possibility. What matters isn't the acreage or the structures we build, but the lives we create there, the values we express through how we use it." Rebecca smiled. "That sounds like it belongs in your next book." "Perhaps it does," I acknowledged. The success of my first book had led to requests for a follow-up, something I was considering with both reluctance and growing interest, though I'm not sure I have another one in me. "You do," Thomas said with certainty. "The story is still unfolding after all." And he was right. The story that had begun with my son pressuring me to sell my house for his wedding, not knowing I held the deed to his dream property, had continued to evolve in unexpected and beautiful ways. It was no longer just about a lesson learned or values reclaimed, but about the ongoing expansion of those values into new expressions, new generations, new possibilities. Around the fire pit, Lily had begun telling a story, her animated gestures, capturing everyone's attention. Even from a distance, I recognized the tale. It was the story of Thomas and Caroline's wedding, how they had abandoned their elaborate country club plans for a simpler, more meaningful ceremony by the lake. She had asked me about it many times, fascinated by this pivotal moment in her parents' journey, even though it had happened years before she joined our family. "She tells it better than I do now," Thomas said with a smile. "Adds her own flourishes." "That's how family stories work," I replied. "They evolve with each retelling, each generation adding their own understanding, their own meaning. As long as the core truth remains," Rebecca added, "that sometimes the most valuable things we possess aren't physical at all, but the wisdom to recognize what truly matters." Thomas raised his glass once more. "To Dad, then, for having the wisdom to see what I'd lost sight of, and the courage to create the circumstances that helped me find my way back. To all of us," I corrected, including Rebecca in the toast, "for continuing to grow, to learn, to build something meaningful together." As our glasses clinked in the soft evening light, I felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over me for this place that had become our family's heart. For my children who had found their way back to authentic values. For grandchildren who were growing up surrounded by love and purpose. For the unexpected grace that had transformed what could have been a bitter estrangement into a journey of reconnection and renewal. My son had forced me to sell my house for his wedding. But he hadn't known I had the deed to his dream home, a piece of property that had become the setting for his own return to authentic living and for our family's ongoing story of love, learning, and legacy. 10 years later, the apple trees in the orchard were heavy with fruit, their branches bowing slightly under the weight of the ripening harvest. From my wheelchair on the wide porch that now connected all 3 main houses on the expanded property, I watched as my great-grandchildren, Thomas and Caroline's adopted grandchildren, darted between the trees, carrying baskets and laughing in the golden September light. At 87, my mobility had decreased significantly in recent years, but my mind remained sharp, my heart full. The family compound, as it had come to be known, had grown to encompass 15 acres of lakefront property, with Thomas and Caroline's home at its center, Rebecca and Sarah's renovated farmhouse to the east, and my cottage, now expanded to accommodate a caregiver's suite and accessibility features, nestled between them. "Great-grandpa," called 7-year-old Maya, racing up the path with a perfect apple cradled carefully in her hands. "Look what I found! Daddy says it's called a Northern Spy, and they're the best for baking." "Your daddy is absolutely right," I confirmed as she placed the apple in my weathered hands. "Your great-grandmother Rose made the most delicious pies, with Northern Spies. Said nothing else would do for proper apple flavor." Maya climbed onto the bench beside my wheelchair, her eyes bright with interest. "Will you tell me about Great-Grandma Rose again? The story about how she planted a garden everywhere you lived?" "I'd be delighted," I replied, settling into the role of family storyteller that had become mine in these later years. As I recounted Rose's passion for creating beauty through gardening, how she'd established flourishing landscapes at every home we'd owned, including the house I'd sold for Thomas's wedding, Maya listened with rapt attention. At 7, she was too young to fully grasp the complexities of our family history, but old enough to appreciate the threads of continuity that connected her to generations she had never met. "And that's why we have roses planted around all 3 houses," I concluded, "to remember her by." "And the Education Trust is named for her, too," Maya added, proving she'd absorbed more family history than I'd realized. "Daddy says it helps. Kids go to college who might not get to otherwise." "That's exactly right. Your grandmother Caroline runs it now, along with your Aunt Lily. When I grow up, I want to help with the trust too," Maya declared. "I want to read all the applications and choose who gets the scholarships." "I think you'd be excellent at that," I told her sincerely. The sound of a car coming up the long driveway diverted Maya's attention. That must be Uncle James, she exclaimed, jumping up from the bench. He promised to help me with my photography project. She ran off to greet the arriving vehicle, her energy seemingly boundless. James, now 24 and a professional photographer whose work focused on environmental conservation, had become a mentor to young Maya, nurturing her budding interest in visual storytelling. I watched as James emerged from his car immediately, scooping Maya up in a hug before retrieving camera equipment from the trunk. At over 6 feet tall, with Thomas's strong features softened by a thoughtful expression, he had grown into a remarkable young man. Talented, compassionate, and deeply connected to this land that had become his childhood home after years in the foster system. "Richard, there you are," came Caroline's voice as she emerged from the main house carrying a tray with tea and cookies. At 62, she retained the elegant poise that had always characterized her, though her once blonde hair was now a striking silver, worn in a short, sophisticated cut. "I thought you might enjoy some refreshments while you watch the apple picking." "Always," I replied gratefully as she set the tray on the table beside me. "How was the trust meeting this morning?" Caroline took a seat, pouring tea for both of us. "Productive. We've increased the scholarship amounts to account for rising tuition costs and expanded the mentorship program to include career placement services." She handed me a cup, adjusted to my preference with a splash of milk and 1 sugar. "The first generation of scholars are now becoming mentors themselves. The ripple effect is remarkable." "Rose would be so proud," I said. "As am I." Caroline smiled, the genuine warmth that had become her hallmark in these later years lighting her expression. "It all started with that wedding, you know. With your strategic intervention that helped Thomas reconnect with his authentic values. And with your compassion," I reminded her. "Coming to offer me money to keep my house, standing by Thomas through his transformation. You were an essential part of that journey." "We all played our roles," she acknowledged. "But you set it in motion with that property deed. I've always admired your patience, holding on to this land for 15 years, waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal it." The property had indeed become everything Rose and I had hoped it might be for Thomas, and so much more than we could have imagined for our extended family. The original 5 acres had grown into a family compound that now included 3 main houses, several smaller cabins for visiting friends and family, extensive gardens, the apple orchard, and protected woodland that served as both a wildlife corridor and a backdrop for James's photography. More importantly, it had become the setting for a multi-generational family life rich with connection, purpose, and meaning. Thomas and Caroline's adoption of Lily and James had been just the beginning. Lily, now 32, had married her college sweetheart, and they had 2 children, Maya and her 4-year-old brother Elijah. James, though not yet married, was a constant presence, his cabin on the property serving as both his home and photography studio. Rebecca and Sarah had raised their daughter Emily to adulthood here after relocating east. Emily, now 26, had recently completed medical school and was doing her residency at the same university hospital where Sarah conducted research. Though Emily maintained an apartment near the hospital, she returned to the property frequently, finding restoration in the natural setting and family connections during her demanding training. "Thomas should be back from the conference by dinner," Caroline mentioned, bringing my thoughts back to the present. "He called earlier, said his keynote was well received." Thomas had gradually transitioned from investment work to education over the past decade, becoming an advocate for financial literacy and ethical business practices. His journey from ambitious banker to thoughtful educator and family man had been remarkable to witness. "And Rebecca and Sarah?" I asked. "Picking up Emily from the train station. They should all be here by 6. Caroline checked her watch. "Which reminds me, I should start preparing dinner. Are you comfortable out here? Do you need anything before I go?" "I'm perfect right where I am," I assured her. "Maya will be back to keep me company once James gets his camera equipment set up." After Caroline returned to the house, I sat watching the activity in the orchard. James showing Maya how to frame a photograph, Lily's husband Michael helping little Elijah reach a low-hanging apple, the family dog, Rusty's successor, a gentle, golden retriever named Marigold, lounging in a patch of sunlight nearby. The scene embodied everything Rose and I had hoped for when we purchased this land decades ago. Not just a beautiful setting, but a place where family could flourish, where values could be lived rather than merely discussed, where connections could deepen across generations. I reached for the leather-bound journal on the side table, opening it to record my observations, as had become my habit in recent years. After the unexpected success of my first 2 books, I had shifted to more personal writing. Reflections meant, primarily for my family, a record of our evolving story from my perspective as its eldest member, as I wrote about the apple harvest, about Maya's questions regarding Rose, about the expansion of the education trust. I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The painful decision to sell my home of 35 years. The calculated risk of revealing the property deed to Thomas at precisely the right moment. The gradual healing and transformation that had followed. What had begun as a desperate attempt to reach my son had blossomed into something far beyond my hopes. Not just Thomas's return to authentic values, but the creation of a family legacy that continued to expand in meaning and impact with each passing year. My musings were interrupted by the arrival of more family members, Rebecca and Sarah, accompanied by Emily, fresh from a hospital shift and still in her scrubs. "Dad!" Rebecca called, climbing the porch steps to embrace me.